So I might have made a bit of a throwaway post, which ended up gaining quite a lot of traction on Instagram last week, where I rated cardiovascular machines on a tier list from best to worst or worst to best. You've probably seen these on the internet fairly frequently. And it turns out that actually quite a few of you are interested in why I rated some machines higher than others, what the benefits are, what I would recommend. And so today's YouTube video, today's podcast, we're just going to expand on that. So if you're never ever going to go near a cardio machine like a treadmill, an assault bike, or a skio, then this is not the episode for you. But if you are unsure which is the best machine, which is going to give you the most bang for your buck, which you should prioritize, the pros and cons of each, then this is an episode for you. And you're either watching on YouTube or listening to it on a podcast. There's no difference really. There's no fancy graphics. We're just going to do this in one take. We're going to talk through why some machines or cardio machines should be left gathering dust in the corner of the gym, and why some you should utilize often and frequently and with lots of intensity. So let's jump in. I'm going to go from worst to best. Now, just for the sake of clarity, a tier list is really common in certain circles on the internet, but one of the questions was, is S the best and D the worst, or is red the worst and green the best? It turns out that whoever designed tier lists, decided that green is worst and red is best. So S tier is at the top, that's the best level, and D is obviously the worst. I don't know why they decided to then invert the colours. You would assume that green is meant to be the best, but for sake of clarity, that's how tier lists work. Now, what we're really looking at here, what I'm rating things on, is on a few key areas. The simplicity with which you can use them, so how much technique is required, because that is going to make an impact on how useful a machine is, especially if you are newer to the gym or an intermediate gym goer rather than a very experienced one. We'll talk about the total body effectiveness, so how many muscles or how many body parts does this machine work. We'll talk about the relative intensity, so there's no point doing something if you can't generate a lot of intensity with that and progress with it. And also then the ease of programming workouts, so that you can keep track of your progress, that you can set your workouts and your targets and your pacings. So this doesn't take into account anything outside of the gym. I'm not talking about swimming. I'm not talking about running. This isn't cardiovascular exercise. This is using machines using cardio machines that you would find in most conventional gyms around the world, I suppose. And what we're not talking about is getting good at specific ones. So for example, if you want to be the best rower in the world, then obviously the best cardio machine is a rowing machine. Obviously, if you want to be the best cyclist, then anything resembling a bike is going to be the best option. We're talking about general fitness adaptations, getting fitter, improving your endurance, and doing it alongside your strength training, resistance training, bodyweight training, whatever else it is you're doing. Let's jump in. First of all, there's no S tier. Well, there is, but we're not using it. This is cardio we're talking about. There's no S tier. We're just going to go from A to D. And starting with what I think is probably the worst out of the conventional gym machines, let's talk about the cross trainer, which might be called the elliptical in some circles. The cross trainer has one or two things going for it. It is relatively simple. Well, it's very simple to use. It can be your first day in the gym or your, I was going to say millionth, thousandth, hundredth day in the gym. It's probably more accurate. And you can use a cross trainer straight away. There's no technique required. Okay, it's not complicated. It's not difficult, which is great. Another thing going for it is that there's no real impact. For some people, running, jogging can be difficult for knees, can be difficult for ankles and stuff like that. But with a cross trainer, you're not going to be dealing with anything like that. It's a full body machine to an extent. Your upper body works, your lower body works. So it's good. But the problem is it's hard to generate a relatively high amount of intensity unless you are a beginner to the gym. So anyone who's been going for a while, it's going to be hard to get up to a level of fatigue and tiredness. It's going to be hard to create a similar output or similar training stimulus that you might be able to from other machines, which we'll get into. It's also hard to generate specific programs because of that. It's hard to work at specific paces or specific intensities because it's just not tough enough. So from a general use point of view, from a beginner, it's fine. If you like doing it, that's fine. It's good. If it's challenging for you, then please go ahead and use it. But for everyone else, I would encourage you to use any other machine on this list that we're going to go through. It's not that you shouldn't use it, but it's just that if I was going to rank it, it would come in at D tier. The next one's C tier. We've got two on this list. The first is a ski erg. Now, I personally love the ski erg. I think it's great. I think the one advantage that the ski erg has over pretty much anything else on this list is that even if you've got quite a serious lower body injury, you can still use it to its maximal potential. So I've had knee injuries that have lasted for quite a while. I have had quad strains, hamstring pulls, sore ankles from silly amounts of running and stuff like that. And I can still go in and do a great training session on a ski erg. You can't say the same thing for treadmills, assault bikes, because obviously they rely upon your lower body significantly. So that is one of the best things. I think it's also great because it allows you to train your body in a slightly different way. A lot of things are very similar. Whether you're using a curve runner, a treadmill, or running outside, it's all the same thing. If you're using an assault bike, a spin bike, a watt bike, a bike erg, it's all pretty much the same thing. A ski erg is very, very different. It's going to challenge different muscles, so that's good as well. But it's still C tier because there is a significant amount of technique that you need to get the most out of it. And from what I've seen in gyms, most people don't get to that stage. They have a tough workout, but they never really progress, and they don't get as much as they can out of the machine because there is a technique to it. You don't have to be fantastic, you don't have to be world class, but you need to have a good enough standard in order to get the most out of it. So it's going to take a little bit of time to get there. If you are in a pinch, you're short on time, you want to do 10 minutes of really hard work on a cardio machine at the end of your workout, you're probably better off, at least initially, going with something else like a bike or some of the other machines we're going to get to, because you can get a great workout straight away. If you've never used a ski erg or you've used it very rarely, then you're going to want to spend a bit of time getting the technique down, getting the fundamentals down so that you can get the most out of it, use it correctly, work the right muscle groups and all that sort of stuff. So it means that there's a bit of a learning curve to it. So for that reason, I think that drops it down a little bit from some of the higher tiers. And I think that the demand on your overall body, the stimulus that you can create, is less than some of these other machines. Again, we'll get into the reasons why. So if we're looking purely from the point of view of what's going to give me the best bang for my buck, what's going to drive the greatest fitness adaptation, I think a ski erg is good. It's a solid C tier, but it's not the best. If you need it for a specific sport, like you're doing CrossFit and it's in your sport, if you're doing high rocks, obviously you're going to use it. If you are struggling with a bit of a lower body injury, use the ski erg. If you like using the ski erg, like I like using it, use it. But if you're short on time, if you don't get many training sessions across the week, I think there are better options for driving overall fitness adaptations. The next one on C tier is the curve runner. These are in here because for the most part, they're just really awkward. The technique on the curve runner is very different, especially getting it started and working out how to maintain a certain pace. So again, there is a bit of a learning curve which can be very off-putting. And it's so similar to running that I would probably just go for a run outside. Again, same thing as the ski erg. If you like the curve runner, use the curve runner. If it's part of your workout and you do things like CrossFit, then again, use the curve runner. I have from time to time. But it is far less versatile than a standard treadmill. You can't change the incline. You can't control the speed of the belt. You can just control, if you can get to that point, how fast you're running, but you can't walk on it. It's very difficult to do sprints. And I find the interface is a little bit awkward. There's just not so many options that you can program with. Again, it's fine. It's good. If you like running, if you like the curve runner, that's great. But if we are purely looking at driving as much of an adaptation as possible with as simple and as effective as a machine as possible, this is a C tier option. Let's jump into the Bs. We've got two in this list. The first I'm going to talk about is just a standard stationary bike. So I've got the bike erg on the list, but you could easily replace this with a spin bike, a watt bike. They all do very similar things. The big thing going for this is most of you watching this will have at some point ridden a bike. And just like I said in the original Instagram video, it's very similar, but a little bit easier because there aren't potholes and there aren't cars on the road trying to knock you over. So for that reason alone, it's really, really good. It's really, really simple. It requires little to no technique, really. You can do it if you've got like an upper body injury or something like that. You can have Netflix on. It's easy to do longer distances with. It's easier to do shorter distances with. You can do top end sprints. You can do zone 2 cardio. And usually they have them in abundance. Most gyms have lots and lots and lots and lots of bikes. Cool, fantastic. A really good, solid option. That being said, the reason it's not A tier is because it's not a full body workout. Okay, like your upper body isn't really doing anything other than scrolling through your phone, skipping songs, or just holding onto the handles, which is fine. You're still gonna get a great training stimulus. You're gonna get fitter. You're gonna improve your cardiovascular system. You're gonna work your respiratory system. You can burn some calories. All those sorts of things. It's still a great option, but I don't think it's as good as some of the other options, and that's why it's at B tier. Really good option. And again, if you need it for your sport, if you like doing it, absolutely crack on. I've been using one recently because it's not something I've used much before and I wanted to get a bit better at it. But I think there are one or two better options. An option that is slightly better but still B tier, B tier. B tier is the standard assault bikes. These are the chain-fed ones, the slightly smaller ones. I think this is a slight step up from a bike erg or a watt bike because your upper body's working at the same time. It's simple. There's no technique required. It's not complicated at all. The only reason it's in B tier as opposed to A tier is because they're a bit. I find they're a bit fragile. They're a bit small. It's hard to put a max effort output on it sometimes, depending upon the brand and the manufacturer and the make and how well it's been maintained. It just feels a little bit fragile, and that's why it misses out to its bigger cousin, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think this is a better option for most people than a standard bike because your upper body's working. So there's more, I guess, global demand to use, to make this sound fancy. There's more overall demand upon your body, okay? Because your leg muscles are working exactly the same, your trunk muscles are working, but now all of a sudden your shoulder muscles, your arm muscles, some of your back muscles are also working really hard. And so the demand upon your cardiovascular system overall has jumped up a little bit. So you can create, I reckon, a better overall training effect. Now, it might not always be possible if you're dealing with an upper body injury. If you're trying to focus on the lower body, then obviously you're going to use the standard bike. But I think between the two, I would rate the standard assault bike at the top end of B tier, and I would put the watt bike, bike erg, spin bike slightly behind it. Let's get to A tier, the top tier. First of all, we have got the rowing machine. This is very different from almost everything else on the list because you can have a very low rate. So strokes per minute, as opposed to revolutions per minute bike or something like that. Like you can do 15, 18, 20, 25 strokes per minute on a rowing machine and still get a really good cardiovascular response. So you're going to be working almost that sort of power and strength endurance end of the spectrum because the rate is much lower. It's a full body workout, mostly. Big emphasis on lower body, especially to generate as much power as possible. Big emphasis on your back muscles and your trunk muscles, and obviously your arms are involved. You maybe don't get your pressing muscles involved, but it's still a full body exercise, and it's going to really encourage you to work that power output to generate as much force for a prolonged period of time. So for that reason, I think it's fantastic. I think there's a reason why rowers are considered some of the fittest athletes in the world, because at those top levels and at those top rates, the demand upon your body is huge. And because there's a low stroke rate, you can kind of extend those intervals, those sets, those workouts for a little bit longer because you get a second or two to recover in between each stroke. So it sneaks up on you, the fatigue. Okay, you can push really, really hard. And I don't think there's much of a tougher test of fitness and endurance than the 2K test on the rower. Now, the only reason I would put it at the lower end of A and maybe think high B, low A and not S tier is because, just like the ski erg, there's quite a demand on your technique initially. A lot of people get on row machines and they don't use them to, it's not they don't use them to the best of their ability, but there's a reason why you want your technique to a solid standard, because you'll get more out of the machine. You'll be able to get more calories burned, you'll be able to do more rounds, you'll get more out of each round, all those sorts of things. So again, if you're using the rowing machine, initially you're going to want to go through a little phase of technique work. You don't have to be world class. You don't have to be Steve Redgrave on it. You just have to have the fundamentals nailed down, and that way you can get the most out of it that you possibly can. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues like you'll feel your back hurting, your grip's going to give up first, your quads will blow up, and rather than it being a full body exercise, you will overutilize one or two particular areas of your body. Now, I'm not going to go into the technique of rowing in this video, but that's the only reason why I would put it at the lower end of A. I still think it's a much better workout than the ski erg because you get, I would say, far more of the muscles in your body involved. So from a demand upon your cardiovascular system, I think it's going to be a little bit greater than ski erg. The outputs are a little bit higher, But like I said, you want to get the technique nailed down. Next, the classic standard treadmill, a solid option at A tier, in part because it's so versatile. And this is what it has over something like the Curve Runner. If you want to get into running, but running hurts your knees right now, whatever, your hips, your ankles, your Achilles, they feel a little bit sore, you can just whack this up to a really steep incline, go for a really brisk walk, and your heart rate is going to go through the roof. So you're still going to get a great training adaptation while starting to work those muscles that are going to get into running. You can do incline work, you can do flat work, you can do sprints, you can jog, you can walk, and you can set up programs far more easily than on a Curve Runner. And so I think it's less intimidating. You can use it much sooner. You can use it with maximal effectiveness much sooner, and it's much more versatile. Gyms tend to have a lot of them as well. Not all gyms have Curve Runners, and the ones that do don't always have the most well-maintained ones. So I would say the standard treadmill, again, better than the Curve Runner overall. If you can use both equally well, you might get more out of the Curve Runner, but I think it's more specific with the workouts that it caters to. If I was just to pick a machine, if I had to pick between one or the other to have in my garage or to have in a gym, I would pick the standard classic treadmill every single day of the week. Finally, the only machine that I would consider putting S tier, if we hadn't already agreed that there's no S tier, because this is cardio we're talking about, is the fan bike. So these are the big, chunky assault bikes, the ones that are built like tanks. For that reason alone, not for that reason alone, I was tempted to put an S tier for that reason alone. These things are just so sturdy. The outputs that you can put through them, or the power you can put through them, or you can feel much more confident putting huge amounts of power through them than you can with a standard assault bike, which are a little bit smaller. They feel a little bit more fragile. The reason it's the top of A tier, though, is, like we've talked about, the demand upon your cardiovascular system and the simplicity with which you can use it. You could have been going to the gym for years, and it could be your first day in the gym. You've got the technique to use an air bike or an assault bike to its maximal effectiveness. Like, you can't use it wrong. It's simple. Full body, you've got your lower body muscles going 100 miles an hour. You've got your pressing muscles and your pulling muscles working. So the demand upon your cardiovascular system is huge. There is nothing like the sense of fatigue you get after a 60-second or 30-second max effort sprint on an assault bike. If I think of times when I've done something like that on each of these machines, whether that's running, rowing, skiing, or the air bike, the big fan bikes, nothing comes close to that level of fatigue on the air bike. And I think that's testament to just how much of a demand it places upon your body. And so if we're talking about creating the biggest adaptation possible, or the biggest stimulus for an adaptation possible, I think the assault bike wins every day of the week, because it is so simple, because it is so effective, because it doesn't matter if you're doing lower body, upper body, just a cardio day in of itself, it fits into everything. The only reason you wouldn't use it is if you had a specific injury that stopped you using it, but that applies generally across the board. This is the only machine I would consider putting in S tier. Yes, I'm very biased in that I bought 2 of them and I love them and I use them every single week. I just can't imagine anything else. A lot of these other bits of kit as well, I feel like you need to do a bit of a warm up. Like when you're doing the rower, it pays to do a couple of minutes of technique work, get your dial set up, get your resistance set up, or your drag factor set up, and all those sorts of things. Whereas in assault bike, you can get on and just go first interval. It doesn't matter. There's something about the fan bikes that just feels harder to push through, to continue work through, than the chain bikes. You can do short sprints, you can do long sprints, you can do single efforts, you can do repeated efforts. It works with other metcons where you're doing other exercises as well, because it's a full body workout. For myself, for my clients, we utilize the fan bike more than any other cardio machine, and that's including the people that I work online with that have access to all of the different bits of cardio machines they could ever possibly want. If I could pick one cardio machine to have in my garage, it would be one of these. And I think that it's just the best option. And I think the fact that it brings up so many negative feelings for people who have used it, like people dread the Rogue Echo bike and similar makes. Again, it just reaffirms in my mind that it's the best one out there. So that's a completely unbiased, scientific, peer-reviewed process that I've got together there. Now, there are lots of other cardio machines in gyms, like recumbent bikes, where you sit back on a bike and you've got your feet going in front of you. I don't think even deserves to be on this list. There are other forms of cardiovascular exercise you can do which aren't machines, so swimming, running, stuff like that. So we're just specifically talking about gym stuff. I don't have an issue with you using any of these bits of kit, by the way, but if you ask me what I would recommend you prioritize, this is what it looks like. I think the more time you spend on a fan bike or a rowing machine and the less time you spend on a cross trainer, the better. If you like a specific bit of kit, use it. I don't care. I just want you to exercise. But at the same time, we can recognize that there are some exercises or some methods of training that are going to give you more bang for your buck. And I think that's what it comes down to. Most of you watching this will have very limited time to train across the week. You'll have very few opportunities to get to the gym. And so you want to make sure you're getting the biggest return on your investment. If you're showing up and you're putting in effort and you're putting in time and you're putting in that focus and intent, you want to make sure you're getting something out for that. It's the same with resistance training. If you're doing lots of low level, not easy, but low level exercises that work specific muscle groups, but you're using a light weight and you're having to go very slow, then you're probably better off picking other exercises, bigger compound movements that allow you to shift more weight for more repetitions, because you're going to elicit a greater stimulus for adaptation. You're going to build more muscle, you're going to get stronger, all that sort of stuff. The same thing applies with your cardiovascular work. If you've only got 20 minutes across the entire week to do conditioning, you want to pick the stuff that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. And this, I think, after almost 2 decades of experience, is about how I would rate those machines in terms of the bang for your buck. So if you disagree, let me know in the comments or ping me a message on Instagram, depending upon where you're watching or listening to this. How would you rate them differently? What would you move around? What have I missed? Do you just hate cardio altogether? And so all of them belong in D tier. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And welcome back to the podcast, and welcome back to the YouTube channel.